Okay, so I'm Julia Gregory. I was an investment banker on Wall Street for 20 years and then got pulled in by one of the companies where I raised money to become their CFO. And for the next 16 years, I was CFO of a publicly traded company and CEO of 2 other biotech companies before I retired, which I actually failed retirement, just like the gentleman in one of the other rooms. And so I have been working my way down from 6 corporate boards to 5 corporate boards. And my board market caps for biotech range from anywhere from $50 million market cap to now $9 billion market cap. And I sit on multiple committees for the board. So that's me.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shawn Fojtik, the late guy. Sorry about that. Was stuck on something, but I'm a medtech guy. So we make medical devices, mostly cardiovascular products that are 510K and used in, like I said, the cardiovascular world, some electrophysiology, some women's health, and some general surge. I do sit on 6 boards now. They range in market cap from probably 40 million to 250, so not anywhere near like the scale we're talking, but I love it. I love being on the boards. It's fun. I think I stink at it, which is okay because I'm always learning, but it's definitely a journey. It's a lot of fun.
Thanks. I'm Keith Leonard. I'm a recovering CEO. I'm trying to retire. I've been in biotech for about 32 years now. Founded a company, was the CEO there, sold it 10 years later, then took another CEO tour after that. I sit on boards, thank God not 6 or 5. I'm down to 3 now because one of our companies sold. But I've been on 5 private companies that became public, a couple of public company boards that were public when I got there. So why am I qualified? I've made a lot of mistakes. So I've seen bad things happen in the boardroom, and I've now developed some kind of philosophy on what good board performance can look like. It's hard to get there, but looking forward to an interesting discussion.
Great. And I'm Chad, one of the partners over at Pelion Venture Partners. We're local here in Salt Lake and Cottonwood Heights. We used to have a thriving med device practice, which we got rid of about 10, 15 years ago. And we do all software investments, including healthcare IT. We have about $1.5 billion of assets under management. I unfortunately sit on about 15 boards right now, which is way too many, but I'm an investor, and so there's a lot of very early stage, mid-stage stuff, and eventually, once they get really big, you step off boards and you end up getting smarter people like these 3 on the boards that help manage it to the next level. So I think boards of directors, we were talking outside for a little bit. I've served on some really bad boards, and I've served on mostly really great boards. And I've seen board of directors destroy companies. And it's these mistakes that unfortunately people they're all people, they end up making in terms of how they treat management teams. And I'd love to just maybe start out with the first question is, for the 3 of you, what is the most common mistake you've seen an entrepreneur make in terms of dealing with board members? And then the most common mistake you've seen a board of director make in dealing with a founding team or a CEO. So both sides of the equation. And I'll kick it off to any of the 3 of you to open it up.
Well, I think the biggest mistake a young CEO can make is not communicating to the board, thinking that I have to prove something, and so I'm going to take this all on myself, and I'm really not going to reach out to the board members. And what I found is my most successful CEOs are always in contact. They're always using the board to maximize their return for the company and their shareholders and the success of the company. And each board member, if you build the board correctly, and sometimes you can't because you wound up in that job and the board was there already, each board member usually brings something really valuable to the table, and find out what that is, tap into it, and communicate often with the board.
Cool, I'll go next. So I find it interesting. So I'm also an operating CEO of a company, and we do make devices. I do have a board, and I'll start on the second part of the question, which was what boards do wrong, and I find it interesting. I've got a job description as CEO. I've got job descriptions for everyone else in the entity. I actually don't remember ever getting really a good job description for a board member from a particular company, like what the CEO, what the staff, what the shareholders expect of me. I mean, I kind of learned, we all learn it, and maybe we learned it in academics or we learned it by watching other mentors. But I come to think of it now, I don't know if, do you guys have job descriptions?
We
Written?
do.
You do?
We do.
Oh, my boards stink then. We need to figure that out.
I'll tell you, my job description at our firm is to call every one of my CEOs that I work with. That's like the.
But do you get like something from a company saying your job description on this board is blank, something that's not your indemnification
No.
agreement, something not your assignment.
No.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't have it, one of the things that might be useful, and I think that Keith probably can comment on this too, is sitting down with each one of the board members and saying, what are your expectations of me? Right. You know, and then finding out who's the decision maker on the board. There's always some leader, even sometimes it's the chairman, but not always. So then you'll get your job description.
No, I like it, and we've done all that, but I just find it interesting. We do a lot of diligence for the operators, but I haven't seen the reverse, and I think it's a good practice to think about. And I've seen then board members, of course, they run to their lanes of expertise, and they can direct conversations to their lanes of expertise.
So Shawn, maybe you can create this job description and circulate it to the board.
I think that's one of my action items for today. I like that. I like that.
Brad and I were talking outside. We actually have someone in common that taught me. Now I'm going to say this is for mature boards. This is something you would aim at long distance, but you probably won't start at, is the board that really understands its remit. So thinking about job descriptions. And this person was Lonnie Smith. He was the longtime chairman and CEO of Intuitive Surgical, where I have the pleasure of serving on the board. An incredible company, incredible culture, including in the board. And his point of view, which I fully agree with, is the remit of the board is to decide who runs the company. That's the CEO and the staff. And who owns the company. So when's the time to raise more money or to sell it? And that's it. If you have a problem with the way the company is operating with a strategic decision, et cetera, or they're stubbing their toe on an issue, see topic number one, who's running the company. Now, I believe in that fully as a mature board, something you would aim for. As a young board, where you often have a CEO that doesn't know how to interact with the board, and to your question of what's one mistake CEOs make, 15 boards you have? One mistake CEOs make is thinking that the meeting is the meeting, that you don't do the pre-calls like Julia is talking about, and assuming that your board remembers everything from the last meeting, which they sure as heck will not. But in that arc of maturity from a very young board to this full mature board, I can't support more what Julia said, which is using your board members individually, hopefully outside the board meeting. So it distinguishes what the board's responsibility is versus what you're able to get from them individually in their areas of expertise. And on a much more collaborative basis, hopefully just a one-on-one phone call. That's what I would advise. And that serves to keep them informed as well and really pulls out that value.
Nobody likes to be surprised, especially people who are sitting on the board trying to be helpful. The best board members I've found do want to be helpful and want to be included, but don't want to be surprised. How do the three of you, and I've seen this in the software industry on the venture side, how do you think about when you're early and you're raising money from a firm, the firm versus the partner at the firm? And like, how does that influence? And so, does that make sense? Like,
What do you mean the firm versus the partner?
So let me.
Who's the board member?
Yes.
Who is the board member?
Who is the board member versus just raising from a firm? And I can give you some of my thoughts on that, or if any of you three have some thoughts on that. I've seen this as a very common mistake for first-time CEOs of younger companies who get starry-eyed about a brand of a firm versus who they have on the board? I'll kick it off to any of the three of you, or I give you my thoughts on that.
I think it's like picking any partner. The person matters more than the brand. The brand matters, of course, but I won't name names, but I went to one firm, pitched, and the partner that I pitched to, I realized I would never take money from, and I know that's kind of an arrogant statement, but I decided that we were going to pick who we took money from, and then later met a second partner in the same venture firm, who I loved, and we actually took money from the firm. He came on the board, was super value added, MD by background. And long story short, I'm now friendly with the first guy that I wouldn't have wanted on. He's definitely a tough person. But if you can afford to be choosy about who the person is, as opposed to the firm, I would definitely, but you should be choosy about the firms too, because some venture capitalists are actually evil.
Yeah. So not
Maybe not
every
in Utah.
dollar,
Vulture capitalists
So
is
not
like
ev-
what we like to say.
not every dollar is worth a dollar, in my mind. You really have to look for the value-added organization. So, I mean, I've had the either good luck or bad fortune to have Kleiner Perkins and TPG and all the big venture capitalists on my boards when I was CEO. They all had different agendas. They all wanted different things. And, you know, it was like herding cats to deal with them. But interestingly enough, sometimes you don't get the choice. You have the partner that the firm chose to put on your board, and then you have to figure out, well, how am I going to work with that person? And you try to work with that person. And in some cases, if you cannot, you can create a relationship with your chair, who might not be from that firm, and the firm, the company, the investment group, to change out that board member. And you have, your chair plays a really important role for you if you have a good relationship with your chair to make that happen. And I have seen that happen on companies as well. It's not fun, and it's disruptive for a while, but sometimes it's really critical, and it needs to happen. The interesting thing is when you go from being a private company to a public company, and some of those venture capitalists don't want to get off the board because they like the company. They like the board. They like the company. Company's doing really well. And then how do you get them off the board?
Put them on a plan. 1, 2, or 3 year plan, right?
Yeah,
Kick
you
'em
do.
off.
You do.
You know, I just from my own personal experience, I having lived in the space of venture for the last 15 years, there are certain partners that I know that I will push my CEOs to not raise money from, and it has everything to do with I know how they act in bad times. So one thing I would say, and I'd love any comments from the three of you, you know, when a company's doing incredibly well, it's up and to the right, you're hitting all the numbers, you're hiring the right people, turns out like as a board member, you're not doing a whole lot because everything's running on time. Like you should be there to support them, but it's not like you're having to do a bunch of work. When things go really poorly, that's where you really see the mettle of that board member or advisor, and the worst characteristics will come out, or the best, right? And that's why I always know, having lived in this, there's just certain people that will act very poorly and reactionary in those times. So any comments on that, I'll throw off to you, but I think it's one of the biggest mistakes that founding CEOs make is they try to raise from just a firm, but don't understand that partner they're bringing onto the board. We joke at our firm, it's worse than marriage. It's easier to get divorced than it is to kick somebody off your board. Like, that person is on there, and you're not getting rid of them. So you better be really careful about who you bring on. Throw it off to three of you if you have any comments on that.
Well, I'm probably a question behind still on some things with things that CEOs can do. I think your point about talking outside of the board is crucial. You know, and this whole idea of coming to the board meeting and doing a report or State of the Union, it's important, but hopefully that CEO, he or she has talked to board members about various challenges and got some feedback on major topic issues. And the point also, I forget who made it, about the fact that we all forget like a previous board meeting, One good practice we do is if you look at Libel Ginster, for example, she runs fluidics. She has an appendix for every board meeting that's probably 40 slides. And it's got, information on the product, information on the chemistry, information on the KOLs, information on, the last 10 procedures done. So if a board member kind of drifts off, or if they gotta pull something from the past, he or she can go to that appendices really quick, and it lives in every meeting and gets built in every meeting. So it prevents, it keeps your board more on topic and prevents them from asking something that takes you back 2 meetings before.
Yeah, the hard part about that is you want to assume they've read even the pre-read. And I laugh. So that appendix is a great idea, but hopefully the responsible board members do dig into that. Just as a practical idea, I used to have my teams, the first slide in every section, whether it's clinical development or maybe CMC or financing, just have a 1-page slide that said, at our last board meeting, I told you this. And then you go into, and then you're gonna end with a slide that says, by our next board meeting, I think we'll be here. Now, this is dangerous because you have to be willing to put up front, at our last meeting, I told you this, and oh, by the way, in between, maybe that didn't happen, et cetera. But even if things didn't go the way you wanted, which they almost never will, I think you build credibility with your board with an approach like that. I like the idea of an appendix, although nowadays so many board members don't even want takeaway materials. They just want it electronic, and you can put it in Board Vantage or
This
whatever.
is all electronic. It's all electronic, but it's a very helpful tool, and I give her a lot of credit for keeping us on target and keeping us focused.
I like the appendices too. I mean, it is a great refresher. But the other thing that I really like in board meetings is when the CEO puts the first page, these are the things I want to ask of you for this meeting. And it really focuses the reader, the board member, on what the CEO wants to achieve. And I just wanted to echo something that you said earlier, which is, the board's there to be a supervisory and support system for the CEO. And if the board thinks otherwise, that the board really thinks they're running the company, then they shouldn't be on the board because they're not running the company. In the first place, it doesn't empower your CEO. And in the second place, you've got all kinds of legal issues. If you start to interfere with management, you're no longer in that D&O insurance level where you're really the director. So I usually chair the NomGov committee and bring on board members. And so I'll wind up really helping them understand their advisory role. Because a lot of former CEOs or sitting CEOs sit on the board. And it's hard for them to break away from, am I running this company? Like you said, who's running the company? Am I running this company, or am I the advisory, supervisory board just pressure testing the CEO and not running the company?
Yeah, Keith and I were talking outside for a second, and one of if you have an amazing CEO and you're letting them run the company, the worst thing you could do as a board member is try to micromanage that person. Like, you have that person in running the company for a reason, and you should advise, help, but you're not there to run the company. I've seen, again, so many vulture capitalists or other prior, people who had been operators who come in who think they know better, and that's not your role.
Well, I'm really glad you said that, Chad. Because I just don't get it with the venture capitalists who come in who've never run a company before, who try to tell young CEOs how to run their company. They've never run a company before. And so while they can see from afar some of the pitfalls in offering, in my experience, I've seen X, Y, and Z, I never understand it because, if you've been running a company, and let's say the new CEO has been running the company for a couple years, being in that hot seat is hard. And nobody knows it unless they've been in that hot seat. What do you think?
Totally agree. No, I totally agree. Completely agree. And the reality is, again, Keith and I were talking about this. This goes back to Lonnie. Your job as a board member, if you're an investor, is basically to help decide whether that person who's running the company is the right person. If they're not, well, that's a whole different conversation. And then the second thing we think about is helping with fundraising. And then the third I think about is I'm there as a support system and almost like a therapist, psychologist, to be on call whenever they need to talk through an issue, to not judge, to not come to quick conclusions, but to listen and advise. That's my role, right? If any of us are operating the company, it's a horrible situation. Things have gone very poorly. The other thing I'll say back to I can't remember one of the three of you, board materials, and this changes so much. So, these three sit on public company boards, and the reporting requirements and board materials are very different when you're a seed stage, Series A, Series B, Series C company, where you're just fighting for complete survival to make it to the next financing round. The thing I always tell my CEOs is I actually want less info in a board deck than more, and what I care about are the very urgent and important things that have to be decided in the next couple of months. And let's have a conversation about those. I talk about it as the doors that you're going to need to walk through over the next couple of months that is a one-way door. Like, these are things that we decide that we have to go through, and I can't undo those decisions. Let's talk about those in the board meeting. That's very different from like when you get to really late stage as a whole set of different issues. But at the early stage, you're fighting for survival, and those are there are three important issues. Everything else does not matter at that point. Any comments on that? Otherwise, I'll ask the next question.
Only to say that when you reach that really mature board and you have a management team you really trust, I think you can compress some of the fiduciary responsibilities to still open up most of the meeting for discussion around those same doorways that do exist even though you're a larger public company.
And the next question or conversation I'd love to talk about is independent board members, and whether they're valuable, not, when you bring them on, at early versus late stage, some of the mistakes also made with bringing on independent board members. Would love any thoughts from the three of you. I'll add on after.
Do we have yes, we do. In the smaller entities, we do bring them on probably earlier than most to try and create some arbitrage between, maybe an investor or two investors that might have different opinions. But we bring them on more often with a distinct, gap filling capacity, right? If we're particularly if we got a particularly clinical entity, we might bring someone on that's more manufacturing. We got entity that's doing more manufacturing, we might bring someone on more clinical.
So I'm always an independent. And usually, in my sweet spot, too, in raising money, my company's raised $2.5 billion last year. And it's usually pre-IPO, I'll come in as an independent audit chair or head of the finance committee to help them do their last private round and then take them public and really be there for them as a public company. But that transition from private to public is tricky, right? And because you want to have the right investors in that last round, and you want them to be able to put money into the IPO round. So that's a really important role for me to help them. So I think that, and then once you're public, you have to have independent board members, or else you get all kinds of shareholder issues if you don't have them. So it's a transition. But before that, when you have investor board members, again, they have their own agendas. So in order to, I'm on a private board right now with MPM and some of the other big venture guys, and whenever there's a major decision, I always get it pulled in by the lawyers more to help make the decision or give the opinion. But at the end of the day, they own the company, not me. And so I have to take that with a great measurement as to, guys, are you doing the right thing? And usually they are, because they're a great group.
Yeah, I would just echo that, especially in smoothing out some of the issues between investors, independence can be enormously helpful as a balance. But also, at least within biotech, you can resource some amazing people onto your board that really, help build that advice around the CEO. I remember a particular learning when I did my prior company called Kythera, and I noted tension between investors on the board, and then I figured out, they all came in at different entry prices, and what they were concerned about was different per investor. So it wasn't just put the investor class in one bucket and the investors in another. And that was something I had to learn by stubbing my toe a few times. And if you have a good independence as a resource, you can help sort that out.
We like to say you have to put your board member hat on at certain times and your investor hat on at certain times, because those can if you're actually a really good board member, you're acting sometimes not necessarily on the best interest of your fund, because you have to make a decision for what is going to be most successful for the entire company as an entity to be successful.
Well, that is your fiduciary responsibility, but your partners could give you a really hard time.
That's why you have to have good partners.
The other thing is you have to be careful of the independents too. They should know your business some way, shape, or form. And I was saddled at one point in time on one board when I was the executive, I was CFO, with the vice chairman of a major bank who's been here today, so I won't say the name of the bank. And he was petrified that we were not making money. It's a biotech company, long cycle, right? And so ever since then, I always ask board members two questions. First, I say, do you have courage? Do you think you are a courageous person? And when they answer yes, usually, I say, well, you need courage to manage a non-cash flowing company as an advisor. Can you advise a company that's non-cash flowing for a long period of time and make big, hairy decisions? Help the management make big, hairy decisions. And it's interesting to hear the answers to that. I've gotten a lot of different answers to that question.
Yeah, I think that's a great question also to ask of the operators. I mean, I think we all have a number of operators who are ambitious and they're inventive, or they've done well in some operating. But it is really hard to sometimes get them to have that courage to, you've got to spend $100,000 a month or $200,000 a month, whatever you're going to be upside down. You've got to do that, even though you're going to run out of business or out of money in 10 months. You've got to spend it like it's going to be here for 3 years, because we'll go get it if you achieve your goals. We will find a way to go get that dough, or that dough will come to you. And so we also have to ask that question of the operators. And I like that. Yeah. I like that.
Well, you're speaking my language. Our firm has close to 70 active portfolio companies and maybe one cash flow positive company. So they're all burning. And that is the wonderful cycle. Again, I live in software. So cycle of venture capital, and it's very scary at times. And people can get over their skis, and it gets very hard. But again, a good board member working with the team can help advise around that. But cash flow.
Yeah, so I've always found that if you have a really good team first, Paul, you and I talked about this, team first, science second, and a really good management team will find really good science or make the science sing, and they can raise money, even during tough times. But, the board's here to help with that and to help with some big, hairy decisions. I mean, we had a decision for one of my companies where we had to decide, do we sell the company for commercial distribution of our drug, or do we decide to commercialize it ourselves? Now, we had multi-billion-dollar offers already. We could sell the company, but we thought the drug was going to be a huge drug. And so, you kind of sit around the board table and you go through all the conversation with management and hear what management has to say, make that big, hairy decision and go ahead and commercialize. And we do not regret that. But it wasn't an easy decision, because it's not traditional. But that's how the board helped the management team to go forward.
Chad, you're also a digital health investor. So,
We are.
okay, so you need
And
to,
healthcare IT.
you need to wear that proudly.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I'd love to get the panel's input on when early stage companies should put together a board. And I'm hoping maybe there's friction on the answer here.
Can I comment on that and then leave it to the three of you? So, early stage, when you're a seed stage company and you raise your first money, often I would advise companies to not put on angel investors on your board if you're not raising from an institution. Again, I'm going to go back to it is easier to get divorced than it is to kick somebody off your board. You put somebody on your board, you're stuck with them for a long time, and it's very hard to get rid of them. When you take money at a seed stage from an institution or you raise Series A, they almost inevitably are going to require a board to get created. At that point, if you have the power, as a founder, you should maintain control, which means the board should be 3 people. CEO, common, investor. You should have control. I know that's horrible to say because I'm a venture capitalist, but it's true. You as a founder should maintain control. That is just the way it should be. And as it continues to grow, the next round, you'll add another board member, there'll be 5. And so I always advise if you're raising from an institution, you should probably create a board, and it's probably going to be required of you as part of the financing round. I'll kick it off to these other 3 who might have different opinions.
Okay, a small company guy. Chad, I hate to agree with you and not have friction, but I'm pretty close. We form boards as soon as we take the money. We want to have a board, minimum 3 people, because you want those extra brains at the table. But we do something differently too. Even early stage in entities, we make the board report actually with the CEO reports with us almost look like a 10K or Q report. We really want them to be thinking, even though they might not be able to fill in all the the sales and marketing activities. That's 3 years away, and we're not going to talk about that. But there's a placeholder there. But we really do want them to populate all the main areas we see in annual reports, so that they can start getting into that cadence and having that dashboard mindset that I've got to be populating this company's value proposition in all of these different areas. So that might be the only thing that I think we might do a little bit different. We form them early at the seed stage. We typically don't take any angel money in or angel representation there. And then we obviously do know it's going to go to 5 people. It's going to go to 7 people at some point.
This may be a difference between medtech and software. But in biotech, I think you probably won't get a Series B done unless you have a board of probably at least 7 people, and they're probably people that investors know their names, they know their institutions, they know why you have them. I've only started a company from scratch once, but I think we had a board of 7 within probably 6 months, and it was instrumental. Of course, there's going to be, we took somebody on from Series B and then took somebody on from Series C, so you end up with a board of 9, which is about normal when you're going to go public, for when you're going to go public. But I would say, in my experience, at least in biotech, trying to attract independence early alongside of your investors helps you get the next set of investors. Julia, I don't know if you
No,
found.
I would agree with you on that. I'm used to, even in my private companies, joining a board between 5 and 7. 7 is usually like the magic number for our side of the business. So that the most successful thing I've seen in company boards is where the founding CEO went to 2 groups of venture capitalists and kind of pitted one against the other, and then chose the best one he wanted to work with, and had that group as his board. And he had a lot more say and control than I would see most founding CEOs do. And so that was fortunate. He had a pretty big reputation to be able to do that. If you can do that, that's great. Now, a lot of companies I've seen present here, because I listened to the Pivot Center conversations, everybody wants to raise $5 million. And I just wanted to say, if any of you are those people in the audience, it's harder to raise $5 million in 15. It's so much easier to raise more money with good investors than little money, because they don't want to have, they want to see you get to a certain stage in your life cycle. And they're always going to say, well, you need more money. So they might not give you all 15 right at once, but they'd rather see you raise a lot more. So you almost are precluding yourselves from getting great investors if you only go out for 5 million. Just my opinion.
I would agree that in biotech, especially in the current environment, where bolder ideas attract better capital and better employees, I think currently it's strange. But I'm going to make the next comment a little cautiously, because I don't want you to overinterpret it. But to some extent, so every CEO should take their board building very seriously, and you should consider it the brand effect that especially the independents plus the investors will have in attracting the next investors. And I know who's sponsoring the meeting today. That's not why I'm going to say this, but in my first startup, we had Wilson Sonsini as our corporate counsel. And then even though we were not required to do audited financials, we only had reviewed financials, I went and because of prior relationships, and I got Ernst & Young to do it. And then we got, we were lucky enough to get Prospect Ventures and Arch Ventures and Versant Ventures in early. And then the brand effect took over because new investors would look, and then you just looked like a firm that had your stuff together. So I would not pick an independent only for brand reasoning. That's my caution. They should be value added and really good people and identify with your mission. But I wouldn't ignore the brand effect either.
Very well said. One thing, and this again might not be applicable in the later stage, compensation for board members. I've seen some people take advantage of young companies, very young, seed, Series A, and require even cash being paid for board level service. I'll tell you from my standpoint, might be different in biotech, but on a software side, at the very earliest of stages, that's very unusual. They typically get equity grants. As an investor, I don't get compensated. I already compensated myself by investing into the company, and everything's riding on whatever dollar I put in and backing you as a founder. It's not to get paid out for board duties. I've already signed up for that. Independents at the earliest stages get equity grants, and that's very important for them, and it's usually a 2-year kind of a thing with maybe a cliff on it of some sort. But at the later stage, it's different, right? At the later stages, when you're a pre-IPO company and you need to hire somebody like Julia here who can help on an audit chair, compensation's a very different thing than if you're coming in at the seed stage. Throw it off to the three of you if you have any comments on that, but I know that was one of the topics that I had heard.
Yeah, in the medtech world, for the smaller entities, we rarely have a paid board member, independents or not. It's 100% on equity.
Great. I just don't want anybody to take advantage of it.
So you're right. I mean, I'm not on any boards that do not pay me cash and equity. I mean, the equity is the most important part, not the cash. So the cash could be, in some of my private companies, very little, and the equity is more. And then if the company ever gets in trouble, one of my companies got in trouble in terms of cash and a timing, and I just flipped my cash into more equity to help them out. But it's for I guess where my boards are, that's pretty normal.
We're at time. This was not as emotional as the last one in terms of it's a board of directors, so it wasn't as good and touching. But the thing I'd leave with you is when you pick a board, when you pick who you come onto the board, it is so critical to do background checks, think through who you're adding, do reference checks, talk to prior CEOs they worked with, see what they're like in hard times, and really vet those people, just like you're vetting somebody on your operating team. It's really important.
Do we want to take any questions?
We're out of time.
We're out of time, but let's give a round of applause to the group.